Hi, this is Garrett Sutton, and you're listening to the Average Joe Finances Podcast.
If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you smash the like and subscribe buttons. If you're listening to our podcast, go leave us a 5-star review. All of our links can be found in the video description or show notes below.
Welcome back to the Average Joe Finances Podcast. I'm your host today, Tanya, the Money Life Coach, and today's guest is Krista Reuther. She is the Senior Education Content Manager at TurboTenant, and she writes really cool content, you guys. She does a lot of data-driven content to help landlords and renters. So she's going to give a lot of good insights today. So welcome, Krista, to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so jazzed to be here.
Yay.
Really.
Okay. I'm pretty sure I did pronounce your name wrong for the third time, but your last name. But Krista, we got it.
We got it. That Krista part is most important, I would argue.
All we need to know is Krista. So let's just jump right in. Tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get here and how did you get into this industry?
Sure. It's one of my favorite stories because I'm obsessed with myself. But really, if we scale all the way back, I've got to take you to around 2012, 2013. I was a college student. I was working and I was a full-time student. And unfortunately, I was not making enough money to sustain myself. So I had a couple options. I could have taken out more loans. I could have tried to stop my degree and move back home. And my third option, the one that I ended up taking, was becoming a freelance writer and editor. So I kicked off my freelance business and I was the cheapest in town, not to brag, but I said, okay, I will edit 5 pages of content for $5. You give me any 5 pages and I will edit them.
Wow, that is a good deal.
It's a great deal. And so I put myself out there and I started getting orders and then I started getting repeat customers. And the moment that really sparked my interest in real estate was actually getting a business proposal for a luxury hotel in Jerusalem. Someone said, hey, this college student probably knows enough to edit this important document to get us these millions of dollars to secure this building. And so I'm reading through the plan, I'm reading through the proposal, and the expected return had so many commas in it that I was utterly shocked. I was a first-generation college student and had a bumpy upbringing, especially regarding financials. And so to see that people could make this kind of money with real estate was a real eye-opener. I had never experienced that before. So I did the job. I sent it back to them. Hopefully they built their hotel. I never followed up. Hopefully it worked out for them. But ever since, I've been pursuing the content side of things and just learning, really trying to grasp everything I could, both about real estate and just the world in general. I've always processed it through my pen first. So I was taking other jobs, but eventually I landed at the CE Shop, which, if you're familiar, it is a company that sells pre-licensing education, continuing education, and some other bits and bobs for real estate agents. They needed an editor. I love words. It was a natural fit. And so I got even more immersed in the industry, figured out how we teach people to sell and buy property. And from there, an opportunity opened up here at TurboTenant. Now, TurboTenant focuses on self-management. So we enable and empower landlords to manage their own portfolios. And my director of education and community said, hey, you want to come over here and do you want to write? Hey, what if you do webinars? Wait, what if you also do a podcast? And here we are.
Okay.
So I was like, let's go, let's ride. So I've been here for close to 3 years at this point. I am in charge of our webinar program, which is a monthly series where I deep dive on various topics to teach folks. We just surpassed 10,000 live landlords taught, which is very pretty cool.
Yeah.
I'm really proud of it. I'm really proud of the content we've put out there. And I also run our survey projects. So I get to survey landlords and tenants every other month to assess what's going on in the industry. And I use those insights and those questions that pop up to fuel the education efforts as well. So it's a really nice little system. And I've gotten to learn so much from being here.
That's super cool. There's so much I want to get into. The first thing that we briefly talked about before we hopped on was like my background's in journalism. I've been writing for all my life. That was the one thing that I got into before. People were like, how did you get into finance? I was like, it was a complete accident, but writing got me there. You know what I mean? And I love it is, as much as people are like, oh, ChatGPT, I can figure out everything. It's writing and figuring that out for a company. I worked with multiple different companies now. Yeah, I just love that you're like how passionate you are about that. And I think just that alone, whatever you're doing, you have to have that passion and excitement about. And that's really coming through. So I wanted to shadow that for you. That I love how excited you are about that. And that's great. And then one of the biggest things too with a lot of our listeners is they do get confused. Like they may want to be getting into real estate or already be in real estate. And this is a huge expense for them to have to pay a company to manage their properties. Yeah, that's really cool. So how do people find you and how do you go about educating them on what that looks like?
Wow. First of all, thank you for the kind words. Really appreciate that. And also, in terms of learning more about how to self-manage your rentals or even how to get started as a landlord, head over to turbotenant.com. You can find a resources tab at the very top of our website. You go to Landlords, and then there can be a whole list of drop downs. We have things you can find our podcast there, the webinars there. I've also written an ebook series on how to get started as a rental property investor. And there are a couple different paths that you can take to do that. If you already own property, you've got an easier way in because you could rent out a portion of it if that's something that you want to do. And the book details what you need to consider, how to go about it, how to make sure that you are legally compliant, and some common missteps to watch out for so that your business can be very fruitful. But I would highly recommend checking out all of our resources there. We're also on YouTube. If you search up TurboTenant, you'll find our podcasts. We really try and make this journey as accessible to as many people as possible because I think it can be so scary to jump into investing. It feels like if you don't already know, you're never going to know. That's not true. That's not true at all.
Yeah.
Everyone can do this and anyone can do this.
Yeah, no, 1,000,000%. I think the resources out there, and even I focus on coaching women and helping women. I help men too. I always say that. I don't discriminate, but it is that empowerment thing because people get so overwhelmed or don't want to start or don't make a decision because it's like, oh, it's going to be too hard. It's going to be too much money, too much work. So that's really cool that you provide those resources and then they can make a decision if, okay, this is something I want to do or no. And what's your take on if somebody owns a property that's close to them versus somewhere in a different state or something? Because I've heard mixed things on that. If you have it in a different state, maybe you get somebody else to manage that for you versus doing it yourself. What's your take on that?
Sure. So that's a really great question. I would say if you're just starting out, I would highly recommend having something close by. That gives you some options in terms of doing quick drive-by checks for your own anxiety. I don't know about you. I have a bit of an anxious person. So just having something nearby where you can just do a quick visual. You don't even need to bother your tenants, but having a quick eye on it is pretty critical, especially as you're building up your tools as a landlord. Once you get to a certain point, though, if you're feeling comfortable, it's totally possible to be a remote landlord and to have property in a different state that you still manage. What I'd like people to keep in mind is that being a landlord it's not a solo job, right? You're not like the lone wolf. Really what you should prioritize is building a team of folks who are local to whatever your property is and leveraging them to make sure that if a plumbing problem pops up, you don't have to stress and try and catch the next flight over to Bozeman, right? You have someone local who can pop in and take care of it. That's not the same thing as a property manager. I want to make that distinction pretty clear. We have a lot of property managers who use our software. I respect them. I appreciate them. And equally, one of the things to keep in mind, especially as you're building up your financial security with all of these investments, is that property managers cost on average about 10% of a landlord's monthly earnings. And there are also additional fees for things like finding and placing tenants in your rentals. And you can do all of that. Again, you're going to want to make sure that you learn on something that's free, like TurboTenant, and try it out before you go full hog, let's say. But it is entirely possible for you to run a successful business states away.
I love that. Okay. Yeah, that's a good baseline for people. And I definitely think too, yeah, if you're first starting out, having something close by, same thing with my anxiety. I'd be like, no, I need I have too much stress. And I've had some clients who have had properties in different states and then they don't know what's going on, which can be very stressful. How do you, or what do you recommend for trying to find good tenants? Because What's the process for that? Obviously, TurboTenant can help you figure that out, but just give us some pointers on how do you find the right people? How do you find people who are going to stay long term, and how do people figure that out? Because that's one of the biggest stressors. Obviously, they're relying on that income potentially and don't want the property to be empty or don't want them to ruin the property or whatever it is. Yeah. What are some of your tips?
Tenant screening is truly a process. I think approaching it that way and making sure that you have very clear requirements for what you're looking for helps people navigate this kind of intimidating journey that it can be when you're first starting out. In terms of the actual process itself, first and foremost, and this might break some folks' hearts, do not rent to your family. Do not rent to your friends. When you enter this kind of
That's a good one.
So I understand the drive, and there is a part of me that feels sad that I have to give that disclaimer, but I've seen it go wrong so many times because when you have a pre-existing relationship with someone and then you shift into a business relationship, which is what you have to do when you become their landlord, it usually ends up either tanking the relationship or really putting your property at risk. Because if you moved in your mom and your mom is like, oh, I'm not going to pay rent because you're my kid, that's not a good business move. That's not great. And honestly, you should probably talk to your mom and maybe go to therapy, but we could delve into that. But it just gets really sticky. So if you can avoid it at all times, please try and not rent to people that you know outside of the landlord-tenant relationship. Then you might be thinking, okay, who should I be looking for? What kind of requirements can I set? I would invite you to get familiar with your local HUD office. HUD is the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The reason I shout them out here is because the tenant screening process is one of those places where Fair Housing Act violations pop up constantly. And it's because there are some implicit biases that we all hold. But when you are putting together a process and trying to choose someone to live in your rental, you need to make sure that you are stripped of those biases as much as possible. So that means setting criteria based on things that do not involve protected classes. So nationally, there are 7 protected classes. It's going to be things like gender and national origin, familial status, but there are also specific stipulations based on where you're located that could pop up. So for example, in Colorado, military status is a protected class. That's not true nationally, but it is here. So that means if I'm putting together an ad, I can't be like, no Marines. And also that would be really messed up. But like, you just need to make sure that you understand the letter of the law before you dive in. Also, you should be considering things like how their financial situation. So how are you going to encapsulate what you need from a person to move in here so that your anxiety stays low, but they're still making the rent? Generally, people ask for 3 times the amount of monthly rent to income. If you need an income to rent calculator, we have several for free at turbotenant.com, but that gives you a good gauge on how much rent someone can actually afford based on their financials. Now, I will also say in this very long-winded answer that I just ran a survey and we found that actually about 51% of tenants are currently struggling. They are cost burdened by rent. So they are paying more than 30%. And an additional, I think, 19% of that 51 are paying over 50% of their income to rent.
Yep.
So that is going to be challenging. And I would highly consider just knowing that information as you move forward. It's going to get more challenging for people to meet that otherwise standardized 30% rule that we have in this industry. As you're moving through, though, you're putting out your bullet points. You're going to say, okay, I want someone who makes X amount of the rent. I want someone who has a credit score between this range. Typically like 600 plus is pretty good, but you can see what mileage may vary in your market. And you're going to want to see if you can check their eviction history and criminal record. Some states let you do that. Many states do. Also, some states don't.
Oh.
So if you don't have access to someone's eviction history, that's okay. You're going to have to just move along anyway. I think New York City does not allow you to check on someone's eviction history. And there are some laws in place about criminal history as well. So that's why it's just a component of your tenant screening and not the entire thing. Mm-hmm. I would also recommend grabbing a reference or 2 from their previous landlords. In fact, maybe get 2 to 3 references just to make sure that you can see how they treated a property, because someone's past behavior is going to usually indicate what they're going to do in the future. So if they were just like ripping things up and they left the place a mess and that landlord would not rent to them again, that is something to consider as you move forward.
Yeah, for sure. It's, like finding a partner or somebody you want. You need to do your due diligence and make sure before you you commit to somebody that this is the right fit and meets the criteria. Yeah, I think it is important though. It does differ even sometimes by county, right? Certain laws and certain rules, which is interesting because I'm in like 4 different counties where I live close by. And something I realized, so I'm still renting, and proudly though, I'm still renting because my rent is a great price and I'm investing a lot, being able to invest a lot because of that. But I was recently getting a new roommate and I got like flagged because no, you can't say you just want a female roommate. And I was like, I didn't think about that. I'm like, oh, yeah, duh, that's like discrimination. But I was just like female, and then I went like preferred. But obviously, yeah, it's interesting to just like knowing those things that you can and can't say.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. And I will say there are some exemptions to the Fair Housing Act. But with these exemptions, you're still not allowed to advertise the exemptions. For example, if you were part of a private organization and you only rented to members of your private organization, then you do not have to follow the Fair Housing Act. Similarly, if you bought a single family home, but you didn't use a real estate agent, there was no real estate agent involved in the selling of the home, then you are technically okay to not follow the Fair Housing Act. However, both of these cases, you would still get flagged for saying, hey, no men allowed. But in practice, it's that marketing piece.
I know it's funny, but wow. Okay, let's talk about a spicy topic. I've seen it firsthand from people who, even with my landlord, she owns a couple properties all right here. And one of the other girls running from her she'd been living there for a while, and then she wanted an animal. She wanted a dog. And my landlord was like, no, we live near a road. I've had animals here before. How do people navigate? Everybody has a service animal nowadays, right? There's a lot of like service animal things, but also just emotional support animals. And there's a lot of different rules around that. How do you navigate that? Because a lot of people don't want people to have a bunch of animals in their new home. And I understand that. I respect that too as a renter. What do you recommend?
It's a tricky situation, right? Because so much, I think the stat is somewhere between 50 and 70% of American households have a pet. And that does not align with how many landlords allow pets. So
yeah.
It makes sense that people are talking about this more and more. I think first, let's make a really quick distinction. A service animal is going to be either a dog or a mini pony. The mini pony bit makes me laugh every time. I don't know why, but it's written into
I didn't know that. Wow. I had no idea.
And I've asked people, I had a really good conversation with an ADA coordinator, and I was like, well, why a mini horse? Like, why is that? And he was like, I think maybe it's because like rural areas, I don't know. It's a bit of a mystery there. But these animals, service animals, have specific training. So those are the dogs, or I guess mini ponies, that you see who can flag a seizure coming or who can be a guide dog for someone who's blind. An emotional support animal, on the other hand, is there to provide, just as the name suggests, emotional support. So these are animals without specific training that have been basically endorsed by a therapist, a mental health professional, a doctor, etc., to support their owner with some kind of emotion-based mental condition. So those can be any kind of common household pet. You could have an emotional support hamster. It just really runs the gambit. But the way to make sure that as a landlord, people are coming in and they have valid ESAs, you are allowed to ask questions. Now, I want you to approach this conversation, and ideally all conversations, with empathy and goodwill, right? We don't want to go into this thinking that the tenant is just trying to get one over on us, because it can happen. It's not always the case, though. Yeah. There are very valid reasons to have an ESA. So to validate them, what you're going to do is request an ESA housing letter. ESA housing letter is going to be a document from their medical provider or their mental health provider, and it's going to detail a little bit about the situation. So it's going to say, hey, Tammy needs this emotional support animal named Rex. Rex is a cat. She needs this to support her anxiety. If you have questions, here's my name, here's my license number, etc. And as the landlord, you can request that documentation. And then you have the right to investigate it. So you can take it, and if you're like, it's funny that Tammy lives here in Colorado, but her therapist is in Canada. Okay, Tammy, can you show me the nexus? Like, how did you guys come together? How is this person your provider? And if they are either unwilling to or unable to prove the connection, then at that point, I would say talk to your local HUD office just to make sure, but you're probably within your rights to say this is not a valid housing letter, because sometimes there are services out there that sell ESA housing letters for $5 a pop, but they don't have a critical nexus point. And there are also some states like Florida, which have now enacted laws that say, hey, you need to have a certain number of visits with the provider before they can write you an ESA housing letter. So again, I would say always approach that conversation with an open mind, but know your rights and know what you're allowed to request, because that's going to help you determine whether or not it's a valid situation. And as a very final note here, I will say the way that the ESA gets brought up is going to help determine how valid it is. If you're doing an inspection and you hear a wolf in a closet and you open the door and there's a dog you didn't expect, and they're like, no, that's my ESA. Is that your ESA? But if they're forthcoming and they say, hey, I have an emotional support animal, or hey, I need an emotional support animal, then you can point them to the ESA housing letter, make that request of them, tell them to have it to you by a certain date, tell them exactly what you're going to be looking for in there. And most people who are doing this in a valid way are going to rush to get you that information. The ones who bristle, the ones who fight back a lot, probably not a valid ESA. And at that point, you can either decide this violates the lease, or if you do allow pets, but you charge pet fees, you can charge pet fees at that juncture.
Yeah. I've seen that too with some, there's a pet fee for an emotional support animal versus, if you have what's the other one called? Sorry, I just blanked.
No, that's okay. Service animal.
Service animal versus ESA. So I've seen like some charge for that, some don't. But I think this all comes back to what you were saying, is doing that background check. The pre-screening of a resident is really going to inform what that looks like. Okay, if they already had the animal in that other house. Full disclosure, I got my cat without going through my landlord. But she's here part-time. I was like, okay, it's just a cat. She's never going to know. And I was like so worried for 3 months, because I'm like that person. I feel bad. I should have told her, but I really wanted this cat. And it was funny. Like, my cat's in the window. So she like comes back to visit. My cat's in the window. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh yeah, I ended up getting a cat. Is that, I just like, oh my God, I love cats.
Oh, see, I'm so glad it worked out.
No, it was cute, but I knew she had issues with dogs, and there was another one, and I'd already been living here 3 or 4 years at that point, but it was funny because like her reaction was like complete opposite. In my head, I was thinking she's gonna be like, what did you got a cat? Start this, like concern on me, but she was like, if you need me to watch the cat, I will. I'm like, so like, oh my gosh. I'm like, okay, thank you. Cause I'm like, I swear the cat is clean. It's not a dog. It's not a puppy.
I'm responsible. I'm taking care of her. Don't you worry. And I will take this moment to say, just so you know, and so everyone knows, people they can't charge you for emotional support animals. That's illegal.
Okay.
So
that is.
They can charge you if it's just a pet. And I like to say a pet is just an animal without a job. But an ESA's job is to take care of you emotionally. And so under the Fair Housing Act, you do not get charged. You cannot have any additional charges. And I think that's why it's such a sticking point for landlords, because they're like, hey, wait a minute. What's going on?
Yeah, because if you can get that form so easily most of the time, then obviously why wouldn't they do that? They're going to charge a pet versus.
Yeah.
This has been a great combo. Let's jump into the final round, and I'd love to get your feedback on some of these questions. What's one of your biggest mistakes that you've made when it comes to your finances or business life?
One of my biggest mistakes that I made was when I was first starting out as a freelancer. I'm cheapest in town. I've got all of these projects rolling in. I should have adjusted my rates faster. Once I had a pretty solid client base, I should have increased my rates, but I had a mentality of, but they got me here. And like, I don't want to like betray them. And I didn't have confidence in what my work was worth. And so it took me longer than it should have to increase beyond $5 for 5 pages.
Like, we'll keep her forever. We'll sign a 5-year contract.
Truly.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point in anything you're doing. And that's hard for people to have the discussion. So I think even with some clients that I work with, like one's a hairstylist, and I've had these clients for so long, and it's been 10 years. It's okay. Like, most people aren't going to leave you. And if they do, you'll get another client who will pay that new price. But it's that mentality, right? It is a mindset shift. What's something that you've learned that you wish you knew when you first started out? You could do this as a writer and both like in the real estate, like in that expertise or area.
I love this question. Something that I wish I knew earlier was how to hold true to my vision and to my goals while being willing and open to hearing other people's feedback, because I'm a recovering people pleaser. And so there have been times, especially earlier on in my career, where someone would say, "Why do you think you're worth that? You're not." I've run into some real characters, and for a while, it really dinged my confidence. And I was like, maybe I'm not worth that. But to your point, if you get one no, that's not a blanket no. That means you're not a good fit for that project, that person, that company, let's say. But you're going to be a good fit somewhere else. And you really have to be rooted in your own self-worth to be able to run after that, while understanding that you are going to get feedback that you need to take in and use to shift your approach over time. Not all feedback is equally good, but that doesn't mean you should dismiss it off the bat.
Yeah, it's that whole thing, especially as a writer, like taking stuff personally. For me, in the beginning of my career too, I'd get assigned pretty big stories and then stuff would get cut or edited. And you're like, you take it so personally. I had to learn that the hard way too, of just being like, oh, I thought this was going to cut.
Yeah.
Really difficult. But
So
a good
hard.
practice for sure. Once you can just be like, okay, it's out of my hand. Like I did the best I can.
Yes, exactly.
Do you have any tips or tricks that you could recommend to somebody just getting started? I don't know what you want to focus on with this.
Yeah. Let's go the real estate route. If you
Yeah.
are excited and you want to get into rental investing, first and foremost, research is going to be your friend. And I don't just mean very dry. I love reading, right? I'm a writer, but I don't just mean sitting down with a book and seeing if you can glean everything you need to know from there. Lean into your community. There are local real estate investing groups all across America in almost every town. If you can't find one locally, you can find one online. And getting in there, hearing what other people are discussing, what problems they're having, you can either learn from your own mistakes or you can learn from other people's mistakes. And I would highly recommend
So true.
the latter.
Yeah, no, that's good. We talk a lot about coaching and getting that support on this podcast, like learning from people who are ahead of you. So just reiterating that for sure is good. What are some of your favorite business, investing, or real estate related books or podcasts? Obviously, you guys have your own, which I want you to plug. But yeah, what are some of those that you like?
Yeah, I will save my plug for the end.
Okay.
I really admire what Brandon Turner is doing everywhere. Brandon Turner has the Better Life Tribe. You can find him at Beardy Brandon on Instagram, which always makes me laugh. But he's so dedicated to teaching people how to have success in this industry, no matter where they start. So I'd highly recommend him. I would also recommend Dr. Jen. She has a podcast called My Life as a Landlord, and she is just amazing. She started with a military background, and now she has a property management business with her husband. She lives on a boat a lot of the time. She walked me around her boat virtually one day, and I was just like,
Oh my
wow,
God.
need
That's
Dr.
cool.
Jen when I grow up. Yes. There's also a local investor named Erin Spradlin. She was based down in Colorado Springs. She's now moved, but she has such a great grasp on investing. And she's also very dedicated to lifting up women and helping to make sure that we have the same access to tools that historically we haven't. So I would say check out those three for sure. And heck, if you want to see more of me, you can find me on YouTube. I am the co-host of the Be a Better Landlord show and Adventures in Landlording. So highly recommend, if only because, again, I like myself.
Adventures in Landlording. I love the name of that. It is an adventure for sure.
Absolutely.
I love that. Okay. So yeah, where can people find more? Is there another website? You said TurboTenant. Obviously, you want to plug that again, your social media and things like that. Just give us another couple links here.
Oh, I will give you all the links. Yes. Go to turbotenant.com. It is free to create an account. So if you just want to poke around and see what kind of tools we offer, from marketing your listing, finding tenants, accepting rent payments, managing maintenance, go play with it. It's always free. You can also find all of our webinars. If you go to turbotenant.com/webinars, you can see the whole series that we've put together. And we are TurboTenant on everything from Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. Wherever you are, we're probably there too. So just search us up. We would love to chat.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Krista, for joining us today. It's been great having you, and you had a lot of good insights, and it was just a really fun, energetic podcast, which I love.
Thank you. You made this such a breeze. It was just a nice conversation. Really happy to be here with you, Tanya. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely go check out TurboTenant, and we'll add all those links to the show notes so you guys can check those out. And thanks for joining us on the Average Joe Finances podcast today. Make sure you go leave us a 5-star review. Let us know what you liked about today's podcast and share this with somebody who needs it too, because a lot of people do. And we'll say goodbye from Lake Tahoe today and Colorado. We'll see you soon.
Thank you for making it to the end of this episode. Greatly appreciate you being here with me today on the Average Joe Finances podcast. If you haven't done so yet, make this the episode that you go leave us a 5-star rating or subscribe to our YouTube channel. The Average Joe Finances podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Have an outstanding day.